Guys, I gotta say, Salvation's Edge may be my favorite raid of all times. Its contest mode, although very, very difficult, will probably go down as one of the most memorable gaming experiences I've ever had. It took us over 30 hours to beat the raid. But luckily for us, amongst other people that did complete the raid during contest mode, the raid exotic is a guaranteed drop. This one being a Strand linear fusion rifle that's actually a special weapon called Euphony. Now keep in mind, this makes it only the third ever special ammo linear fusion rifle in the game. Even more special though, it's a 3-round burst linear fusion, which instantly makes itself different from things like Arbalest and Lawrence Driver. On top of that, it's just sexy, man. But first, let's take a look at its perks. For our intrinsic exotic trait, we have Unwound. Dealing sustained damage with this weapon spawns Threadlings at your target's location. Now, with this thing being a 3-round burst linear, this allows 3 Threadlings to spawn every other burst. And it seems you need to land all 3 shots in a burst. Then for its secondary exotic trait, we have Spindle. Threadling damage increases this weapon's damage. Now, this is a very unique trait, guys. Each time your Threadlings damages a target, this will add, as you see there at the bottom left hand in your corner, a stack of a Spindle buff. Now this stacks up to 25 times, and at max stacks, this nets you a 50% increase in your damage, which is pretty wild, guys. I'm literally using it right here on boss damage phases, and although my damage isn't as good as my Celestial Hunters who were procking Still Hunt, to my other folks that were rocking heavy weapons, this was actually comparable. Now this also means that each stack of Spindle is roughly a 2% increase in damage. But since this is spawning 3 Threadlings though, this means every other burst should also be increasing your damage by 6%, with this buff that lasts for 9 seconds, but refreshes its timer anytime a Threadling deals damage. And you'll see it right here, guys. It literally adds a stack and resets that timer. And if the timer is about to end, you can also just hit someone with Euphony to reset the timer. And before you ask, yes, this works literally with any Threadling source. You want to throw a Threadling grenade out there, you can. And this will extend the damage and add more to those stacks. Now looking over at our base damage, each shot from our burst is dealing 20,338 damage, which is roughly 61,014 damage per burst. Then our second burst will spawn 3 Threadlings, which when you tack that in, that means our second burst is dealing 98,649 total damage. Now, another thing to note is that if you're on Strand and you're using things like Thread of Evolution, this increases our Threadling damage, going from 12,545 to 16,685. Tagging on more damage to that second burst, increasing this to 111,069 damage. That's one burst, guys. Now, after our second burst goes out, and as our 3 Threadlings spawn and damage Coral, you'll see the damage buff Spindle appear in the bottom left-hand corner, right above our super meter. It will then go to ×3 from our Threadlings, and each shot from our burst now deals 21,558 damage, or 64,674, giving us that 6% increase. So essentially, every other burst after our Threadlings spawn and deal damage will be increasing our damage by 6% up until we hit that max stack of 25, giving us 30,507 damage per shot for a total of 91,521 damage per burst for that whopping 50% increase in damage. And if you include the damage of 3 Threadlings on top of that 50% buff, this would be 129,156 damage. And with Thread of Evolution, it would be 141,576 damage. So if you're just dealing sustained damage to a target, every other shot is going to spawn those 3 Threadlings. And when they damage the target, you're getting that 6% increase. Now this means after 18 bursts, it's your final 2 shots that will be dealing the maximum of 50% increase in damage. But let me just say, guys, even at base, I was really impressed with this thing. Like as I'm sitting there taking out Tormentors or just using this thing in the raid, I was really impressed with Euphony. What gets even more impressive is when we start combining this with certain Strand builds. You see, it's all going to be about how quickly can we get those high stacks of Spindle. Now, some builds are better than others. For Titans, you can go Armamentarium, rock 2 Threadling grenades, and literally just chunk those things back to back. But Titans have never really been a Threadling heavy class. Warlocks, however, they got the juice. You've got Mind Spun Invocation. You pair that with Threadling grenades. You can get 5 perched Threadlings. You can also use Weaver's Call. I mean, there's a lot of different things you could do here. Then you've got the Wander, where Threadling Final Blows create a tangle, as well as tangles that you throw attaches to targets and does that suspending burst. So whether you're throwing the tangle or shooting the tangle, you get that suspending burst. Then pair it with Swarmers, where destroying that tangle spawns a Threadling and allows your Threadling to unravel targets that they damage, which yes, does allow Threadling spawn by Euphony to unravel as well, which tacks on even more damage. On top of that, Warlocks, you've got Needle Storm, which generates a ton of Threadlings, which is why I think Warlocks are so good with Euphony. But then we have Hunters. I have utilized a number of different Hunter builds that have taken advantage of Threaded Spectre, where activating your class ability spawns a decoy, and when destroyed, they spawn Threadlings. You can also rock Threadling grenades. But then we have the new Hunter exotic called Balance of Power. This is where your Threadling Spectre has increased duration and durability, and damaging it releases additional Threadlings. Now, a lot of people weren't that impressed by this thing in our initial review. In my opinion, though, Threaded Spectre is already S tier. You combine this with this exotic, you're generating 4 Threadlings instead of the normal 2 with Threaded Spectre. Combine that with Widow Silk to get 2 grenade charges for Threadling grenades. My God, you're pretty much always going to be running around with high stacks of Spindle. The other beautiful thing is that weapons with Hatchling allows those Threadlings to count towards Spindle stacks as well, which is going to be really important because there's going to be a way to get this exotic with traits. Now, I'm not sure what traits are going to be added here, but if you go into your Triumphs, then to the Pale Hearts, and then to Salvation's Edge, and then scroll all the way to the right, you'll see this Triumph right here. Salvation's Edge patterns collected, and it says collect Salvation Edge weapon patterns, current step 1 of 6. Now I've collected 1 pattern so far, but then right under that, it says Triumph completed rewards, increases the chance for an extra weapon trait for Euphony. Now that's crazy. I don't know if this is going to be something, guys, that's tied to maybe the master mode version of the raid, but somehow, some way, we're going to have the ability to earn more drops of Euphony. And there is a number of triumphs that you can acquire that increases your exotic drop chances. And I'm assuming what's going to be on those drops are going to be additional perks on that exotic. And you can imagine how nasty a perk like Hatchling would be on Euphony. Now listen, guys, I don't know the details. I haven't completed this triumph. I'm not even sure if this is going to result in some way of Euphony becoming craftable. But what I will say is, considering there are so many sources to create Threadlings, there's so many exotics that take advantage of Strand and Threadlings. And then you have fragments like Thread of Evolution, increasing the damage of those Threadlings, which also increases the damage of those Threadlings from Euphony. And then reslap on a perk like Hatchling, and then Rebirth, which can double up and give you multiple Threadlings per kill. Fellas, this is clearly not Euphony's final shape. Now, I know the only thing most of you probably care about is the damage. And yes, we are going to be doing damage testing this week with it. But for the time being, I'll give you some context to how it compares to some other weapons. Considering at base, it was dealing 61,014 damage, and our second burst with Thread of Evolution was increasing that Threadling damage, cranking us all the way up to 111,069 damage. If we compare this to Arbalest, a single shot from Arbalest is dealing 50,257 damage, which is well below a base burst from Euphony. Now, looking at some of our heavy ammo linear fusions, specifically our 3-round burst ones, at base, they're dealing 73,224 damage per burst, which compared to base Euphony is higher. But again, that second shot with the Threadlings is outperforming our heavy linears. And what's so wild here, guys, is on the topic of potential traits being added to this raid exotic, I'm purely speaking from the perspective of creating lots and lots of Threadlings. On the other side of things, we could get damage perks. Like, imagine if we got Precision Instruments as a trait option, or pretty much any other damage perk. That right there is going to put it at base comparable to our 3-round burst heavy linears. Now, here's the thing. Is Bungie going to give us a damage perk on top of a damage perk? I don't know. That sounds pretty wild. But dude, this could potentially become literally the best weapon in the game if they gave us Precision Instrument on top of the buff that Spindle itself gives. Just for a point of reference here, Precision Instrument procced on a 3-round burst heavy linear is dealing 95,190 damage per burst. Then if we look at Euphony with Spindle times 5, our damage is right under it at 91,521. The second burst substantially surpassing it at 141,576 damage. And again, this damage keeps cranking. These stacks add so much to this weapon. You have these Threadlings spawning and going off every other burst, which truly puts Euphony ahead of all of these other weapons. Now, granted, this weapon gets stronger the longer the DPS phase, as you'll need to build those stacks. But you can imagine going into a damage phase with your Strand super on Warlock. Literally just launch your super, throw those Threadlings on the boss, proc those stacks of Spindle, and then continue carrying those stacks with the burst of the weapon itself. And yes, if you're rocking Swarmers on Warlocks, you can take the damage even further, since those Threadlings will now be unraveling the targets. There's so many damage numbers happening here, guys, that I truly just need to do damage tests this week, of which we will. But again, just using this weapon against the Witness as a special weapon, it's holding its own against the competition without me pre-buffing or doing anything else else to this weapon, literally starting at base and working those stacks up throughout the damage phase. Now, for those interested in using this thing inside of PvP, dude, it's been a long time since our special linears have been meta. At one time, though, Lawrence Driver was wrecking everybody. This is one of those weapons that I'm just gonna have to mess around in places like comp, just gotta see, is it really worth using at all in PvP? I'm assuming not. However, it does do a fair amount of damage, especially per crit. Its body shot is only 40 damage per body within that burst, but its crit damage is 135 damage per crit, which means only 2 out of your 3 shots need to even land as crits. But again, what it really comes down to is how well does it handle flinch and how good is its target acquisition, something in which we'll need to put it under some stress to really see how it performs. Overall though, guys, this is a very unique raid exotic. I'm already placing it at the top of the leaderboards. I believe this weapon is already currently a monster. You combine this with weapon traits in the future that drop on this thing, this thing is only gonna get nastier. But as soon as we know more about those added traits, we'll have a pinned comment down below. And for my folks wanting damage testing, we will be comparing this weapon to a number of different heavies over on our Twitch, so come join us. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.